Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in three ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast.
On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Bobby Lucas. He is the performance coach currently with the University of Michigan. Works a lot with the men's hockey team there. So I'll stop there. I know, Bobby, you'll do a much better job of explaining exactly all of the long title that you have. Maybe just a quick 30-second background.
Yeah, so background, graduated undergrad at Penn State, was actually here at University of Michigan for my grad school. And yeah, now it's really come full circle. Had an opportunity to get in with the team this year in a bit of a performance analytics video role. So it's been great. That's kind of the broad strokes history that brought me here.
Well, if we back it up a step, one that you missed, there's a little bit of time with the Chicago Steel that had just a little bit of success. You won the league championship. I believe you set a bunch of records, even in a COVID-shortened year. So I'm curious, maybe we start there because I feel like that was an amazing accomplishment, and you're a large piece of that. So maybe give us a little behind-the-scenes look of what your involvement was with the team in that capacity.
Yeah, so with the Steel, it was pretty awesome. Obviously, a really special group there the past 2 years. But my role there was director of performance and sports science. So really, I oversaw a lot of the strength and conditioning, rehabilitation or return to play work, and then just marrying a lot of that work to what's done on the ice. Our guys at the Steel all wore heart rate and accelerometry units, so we can see, the XYZ axis that they're accelerating in, as well as to what bandwidth or degree they're accelerating. And so that provided us kind of a snapshot of that external workload that they're doing on the ice, that we could then marry to the internal workload of the heart rate, and what the heart's response is to that. And then ultimately kind of break that down to, what are the demands of the game? What are we doing in practice to meet those demands, be it, skill development work or more team-based concepts, and quantifying what those workloads are, so that the coaches themselves could then kind of really structure out practice and obviously ultimately the season. But really a lot of the credit goes to the coaching staff on everything, and the players first and foremost, just because of the openness that they brought to really everything they had there, be it new ideas I had to players bringing new ideas of what they're seeing, and just a lot of openness and willing to learn. Excuse me. Kind of top to bottom throughout the Steel organization. So yeah, it was a pretty cool experience.
That's a really fun time, it sounds like. Curious to dive into what you just talked about, which is athlete load management. How do you manage the load, as they say?
Yeah, it's quite the buzzword nowadays. So to me, like, particularly at that age, where the Steel are, where they're kind of in this almost sweet spot of development, be it as young as potentially 15 years old to up to 20 years old. the thing is, there's a ton of differences individual to individual at that stage, right? Like you got some guys who are shaving, others who, won't hit puberty till, 22, like myself. Um, so you got to kind of adjust and manage the load on an individual to individual basis, because some guys are going to adapt differently to the same stress that's put on them, whether that's stress from the weight room or skill development plan, or stress they're getting from school, and they're all trying to juggle and manage that at that age. So for us, it's about how much can we get from the squeeze, right? Can we get more out of that orange at that age, because they're in such a good window for development, that a lot of the load management for us was ensuring that, A, we're pushing them hard enough, but B, we're pulling back when necessary to allow adaptation to occur, allow learning to occur. So we really tried to individualize that in the name of development, both on and off the ice. Less so about kind of the buzzword that you hear with load management, when you see it in the NBA or professional sports about, being in their optimal performing state for whatever game or event playoffs are coming up. For us, it was much more development focused rather than performance based. That makes sense.
Got it. So what are some of these KPIs, the key performance indicators that you're tracking to get the proper amount of load? Like, oh, their heart rate's not getting high enough. What is that? You got surveys with the players. How do you go about monitoring that, and what are you watching?
Yeah, exactly. So I'd say stress is really the KPI, and it's then as we work backwards, the questions that surround it are, how do we quantify that, right? How do we capture a snapshot of the athlete's stress? So there's a number of ways we can do it, and we tried to take a different, multifaceted approach to it, where we're asking the athletes just straight up, like, what's your level of stress each morning? So they would fill out a questionnaire. What kind of helped us in that regard, actually, as an aside, is COVID. We had to get screens from the players to ensure that they're, weren't COVID positive or symptomatic. So it was really easy to include some of these questions for that COVID year in that, and ensure that the athletes did it, because they couldn't even come into the rink without answering this. So, but yeah, we just ask them simple questions. What's your level of stress today? What's your level of soreness? How much energy do you have? And then we'd ask them, quality of sleep, hours of sleep, and urine shape, so we could see how hydrated they are. And then that kind of creates this subjective or wellness, perceived wellness that the athlete has coming into the day, which is useful because, there's times where, you might not be, just fully ready to go or be engaged because you got a big exam that you haven't studied for and your girlfriend broke up with you. So for me, that's helpful to know, where, like, I don't need to go now crush you in the weight room or crush your central nervous system when you got all this other stuff going on you got to deal with. So it gives us kind of that quick snapshot into their life where their stress is. And then we would also 4 times a week do what's called a drop jump test. And this is a test for what we would call your neuromuscular system. And the way I would kind of describe this, so the athletes, it's a protocol. They just step off of about 4 to 5 inch box, and they hit the ground and try to rebound off of the ground as quickly as they can. So they're going to minimize their ground contact time, and then we compare it to their flight time. And what we can see is just a quick snapshot into the fatigue of the central nervous system, just based on the maximal recruitment that is required to land stiff, minimize that time on the ground, and rebound as quickly as you can. Very non-fatiguing and a non-invasive way, but it gives us a very sensitive look, especially after about 6 to 8 weeks of monitoring this. We can see fluctuations inside and outside of but usually 1 to 2 standard deviations. And that allows us to then manipulate what what their week might look like on the ice, or in the weight room, or just, intervention might be needed. Maybe they need, like I'd honestly have a guy or send guys up to just take a nap at times, where it'd be more beneficial for them to, just shut it down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, as opposed to getting back in the weight room and just crushing them again. If they're not going to recover from that, they're not going to be able to adapt, then there's really no point. I'm actually doing more harm there. So, kind of a long-winded answer, but by collecting, that along with the data points that are provided by the heart rate monitor and accelerometry, we would get just a simple working unit. So it'd be like your work rate, how much output are you putting out there per minute? And then once we got that dialed in for the drills, we could just say, as we're piecing together practice, drill A plus drill C plus drill D, with a minute of recovery in between, is going to provide an anticipated workload of this to the guys. Based on our history of 100-unit workload, we expect them to be at a 4 soreness tomorrow. And then we can kind of work with that when they come in at 3.5 soreness. All right, so we get a little bit more opportunity to push them today, or maybe that's just right in the window of where we were looking, to kind of deload or pull it back before a game or something. So hopefully that all made sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'm curious, as you're season planning, are you concerned about loading early in the season, or are you trying to phase into peak at the playoffs or something like that, where you're trying to actually make some gains throughout the season? It's not just managing and trying to stay about the same, but actually make some gains. Maybe you're not going to games in the regular season at full capacity, but when playoffs hit, you're peaking. So I'm curious about maybe the phasing and how you guys managed and thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head there. That was a conversation we really had early on as a staff, and it really started actually with Greg Moore, who's now with the Marlies, and then later Brock Sheehan. And like I said, I can't say enough great things about those guys. They're awesome. But their approach very much was that developmental approach. Like, we're going to make gains in the season. We don't care if we're going into Green Bay this weekend a little fatigued, or so from pretty much the start of the year till like February, even March, like, we're pushing the guys, and they're going to go into games where they're going to be sore, but they got to kind of push through. And, like, to be honest, a lot of credit to our guys, knowing that, and still battling through to have the record that they did that year is pretty unbelievable. But then to the kind of the latter point you had there, we do still peak. And it actually almost works in our benefit as we're pushing and pushing throughout the season. It creates an opportunity to slash that volume and have a really effective taper leading into the playoffs and ultimately the Clark Cup. But yeah, for the most part, it's like, they're, like I said, 15 to 20. They bounce back really quick after workouts, after setbacks for that matter too. So it provides us an opportunity to really push them through the season. Where, like, in the doldrums of the season, January, February, we'd be working out 3, even 4 times a week at times. We'd limit the doses of the workout. We're not crushing them for an hour, but still trying to make gains. Yeah, to that point.
So how does that compare with the college schedule that you're currently going on? I'm assuming there's some differences between the USHL and the NCAA, and how you're able to even have access and all the regulations that come with an NCAA team.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing for at least my perspective, is the access. Like, with the steel, we would have the kids coming in as early. Some guys would be getting in at like 8:39 for their first lift, and then they wouldn't be leaving till 4 or 5 o'clock. So we're able to influence 8 hours of their day directly right there. Whereas at the college level, you're obviously limited to the 20 hours NCAA rule. So when you factor games into that, I mean, that's 3 hours a day. So your scope of impact, I think, is far more narrow at the NCAA level. I also think that there's an added whole new element of stress that's introduced with the social scene at college. And I'm in no way knocking that because I think that's a big part of the NCAA experience. But it makes it really hard to quantify from a performance perspective, right? It'd be great if some of the kids, and some do, have the interest in like aspects like the whoop and stuff where we can get more of an encompassing snapshot of what's going on. But you can't directly ask them to do that at the NCAA level like that again is a violation. It'd be pretty easy to identify, the nights that they went out or were having a good time. So it's definitely a different beast. At this level too, there's a lot more focus or need to win. So I don't oversee the strength and conditioning, but in talking with our strength coach, our athletic trainer who oversees a lot of the heart rate metrics here, it's about getting them as ready as they can be week to week, and less so about we need to add lower body strength to this guy, or I'm concerned about this guy's just first three steps. Like there's a very narrow window to do that in season, where it's very early in the season, as opposed to at the USHL where we can make pushes and gains pretty much right up until 3 weeks before the playoffs.
Yeah, it seems like the NCAA's got a much shorter season, so it may be a little bit harder with that, even though there's some weekend games. But the off season is much longer and really allows for those physical gains to occur. Is that about accurate?
No, I think that's dead on. Is yeah, in college and then even taken into pro, it's really the off season where you're making a lot of the games. And typically guys will have their own personal trainer that they'll go see in the off season, which is actually kind of a whole nother rabbit hole there. But yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. That's a fair assessment.
All right. So your second part or first part, or I don't know. I mean, you got so many parts of your job.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about maybe some of the data and the analytics and what you're looking at with those, because everyone knows it's the hot buzz, but I feel like we need to make sure we got a good window of the data and the analytics and how we're looking at the problems, and how we're monitoring everything.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a hot buzz topic. I try to be careful because I've had times, even when I'm talking with coaches, where I dive into it a little too far and you just watch their eyes glaze over. So if at any point, I'm losing you or you don't think the audience is interested, just interrupt or interject. But what's been cool about here with the University of Michigan is really trying to marry a lot of the data that's collected, be it through heart rates, GPS, or accelerometry, and questionnaires, to what's actually going on the ice, right? Like that's ultimately why we're here. We got to know the demands of the game. So this year I did a lot of work on the video side where we're clipping up the game in a software that's called Exos. But what's great about that is the ability to then export out all of those clips so we can then see, this was our successful entry rate, but we also have what kind of entry. So, was it a possession-based entry where we're skating the puck in versus, hard wraps, we're getting the puck behind their D coming in hard type thing. And then marrying that with what, again, their external workload is or what the body's being asked to do in internal response with the heart rate. Really see, are we meeting the demands? Are we in, physical shape to execute? When are goals occurring? There was a period or a spell early in the season. We were giving up a lot of goals in the last 5 minutes and at the end of shifts. So it creates coachable conversations, I'd say, in that regard. But yeah, just like a lot of what I've found with the data is it's becoming more and more about who can use the data or make insights about it, because everybody now is getting data. Everybody has data points on your athletes. So that was one of the big concerns I have when I'm giving questionnaires, is like, we want to make this actionable. So how do we keep it just to 5, 6 questions that are going to be really sensitive and be used? So in addition to that morning questionnaire I mentioned earlier, the athletes also gave evening questionnaires where they talk about their rate of perceived exertion, or how hard they saw each session they're doing. And then that allowed us, by multiplying out that number by the duration, to create a snapshot of how hard each athlete thinks each session they experienced that day truly was. And then ultimately, just like the drop jump, those become sensitive. Like, you'll end up inevitably see guys that just mail it in, right? Who are answering 8s every day or whatever. But the ones who take it seriously, we're able to really find variations day to day where they think, this day was much harder. And what's interesting to me is when it doesn't match up with the data, right? Like, I'm expecting that Monday was supposed to be an easy day in the weight room, and it comes back like, and they're saying I crushed them, and say, okay, so something else, is going on here. That's, now we got a piece to the puzzle or something to solve. So I don't know if that answered your question about exactly what data we're looking at. Like, there's, I guess, the drop jumps, the questionnaires, heart rate, accelerometry. And then we did a bunch of testing too with the steel early on, just simple like power output through broad jumps, change of direction, off ice ability. We had functional movement screens just to see how they move. As far as like in weight room testing, the only max test we would ever do, I guess there's 2 max, was push-ups and pull-ups. But we would never max out on weights. For us, we would do like 3 to 5 rep max protocols, just to kind of get a snapshot of where that window is. But a lot of what we did in the weight room is what I'd call auto-regulated, where I'm not dictating exactly what load or weight to use. A lot of that is self-selected. But yeah, like, the data points, I think that kind of covers it. If that was what you're asking, there's, the video side as well. But yeah, hopefully I answered your question there.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun there. So are you dictating, or was strength and conditioning dictating the weights? Like, hey, today we should do this for this amount of reps and that kind of stuff. You open that box for me, and now I'm curious, since you're saying auto-regulated. So is the athlete kind of choosing what they feel is best, and you're just giving maybe a little more guidance on, okay, we just need this amount of reps. How you feeling? Here's a general idea of weights.
Yeah, exactly. So I would have what's called our periodization model for the entire season, where we sort of work backwards, right? Like, we know where we want to be. That's the Clark Cup. And we want to be in peak performance there. So then working out from that, how do we structure the season? And so, yeah, we would have very regimented volume, I would call it, sets times reps, or tempo work in there. Particularly early in the season, a lot of like isometric type holds. But then, yeah, the athletes are, for the most part, allowed to select the weight themselves. There would be instances, and you got to kind of, this is where I think the coaching aspect comes in knowing your athletes, where if, for instance, you're on a speed power block where you want the athletes going lighter, but we got to move this real fast. You got to know your athletes, because there's going to be some of the guys who, are squatting 450, like they just want to load it up. They just want to get heavy. And so to kind of explain and work with them, like, actually, I know you can squat 500 and that's awesome, but like, we got to go 250 today and you got to move it quick. And so I think that's kind of a cool chance to have those coaching opportunities, but you do leave the window open for, some of that when you let them self-select the weights. Where if, in an ideal world, I'd love to do more of a velocity-based training where we're measuring how fast they're moving things as opposed to how heavy things are. Just kind of a little bit different perspective. But to me, that matches the demands of hockey a little bit better, right? It's less so about how strong or how much you can move the pile on the ice. It's about how quickly you can pull the puck off the wall and get to the center of the ice. So, trying to match the demands of the game a little bit better off the ice, I think you'll always see better, greater results. But yeah, that's more what I mean by auto regulation, is that the athletes are allowed to select that with, the coaching guidance there, obviously, too.
All right. And there was one other piece that you mentioned that I really want to dig into is you're talking about testing and like movement patterns. Is that kind of accurate? Like you're looking at how athletes move?
Yep, exactly.
So within that, I guess I should leave this more open ended. You can take it wherever
no,
you
you're good.
want, but just like the idea of maybe there's some more ideal movement patterns, or there's like separating upper and lower body obviously is extremely important, and I'm assuming that's one thing you're probably testing and looking for. But like, what else are you looking for through these tests and monitoring them as they go along?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that we're looking for. First, we want to make sure the athlete's like simply just capable of moving well so that they're not going to get injured. And so just finding simple limitations there. The second I would say is that there are some really unique aspects to hockey. Like it's not a ground-based sport, so you're creating forces in a way that our body doesn't naturally create forces throughout the day. Wasn't even necessarily evolved to create those forces. And so that's the way, we're skating, right? Walking is very linear, forward, backwards. Skating takes on a new dimension where we're going at 45-degree angles. And this is totally setting aside the goalie aspect, which to me is almost a whole different sport. But with early specialization, I'm seeing a lot more issues with guys 15 to 20 with their hips, and they're not moving well. They have really poor core strength. They'll get stuck into anterior tilt, which, like if you can imagine a cup, it's like pitching it forward like that, but with your pelvis. And when you get stuck in that, you get a lot of issues up and down what we would call the kinetic chain. So going up, to your spine and back and down to your knees and ankles. So first and foremost, we just want to see, can they move without getting hurt? And then it starts to open up opportunities to look in at, repetitive motions. Like, are they, like I said, early specialization, too much skating? Are they having issues with their hips because of that? And then the third is to ID areas of strength, areas of weakness. One of the conversations that was really enlightening or eye-opening to me was one I had with Adam Nicholas, who's now with Montreal, where previously I'd very much had the perception as a coach, I want to pull up the athlete's deficiencies to be on par with everybody else. He's like, no, 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 no. Like, we need to look at it this way, where this athlete has this strength that it's got him to here. Like, how do we make that into a better weapon for that athlete? So he really, shifted my perspective on that, like lean into where these guys are strong. And then what I also found is that almost feeds the beast. Like once they get the chance to do something they're good at, they want more and more. So, learning how to sprinkle that in also is helpful in, that engagement aspect. And then the last piece to tie it back to your movement pattern or the movement testing is in testing them on the ice, looking at how they're moving there. Just by nature, a lot of energy leaks happen in hockey because it's not a very familiar aspect. Guys develop bad habits or bad patterns, particularly if they're at a desk all day in school sitting like this, and then we ask them to go skate and it's kind of like this. You get really rounded shoulders, got to work on the scapular retraction. So then to see them execute in their game environment, I guess is what I'm getting at, on ice, and to look at how they're moving, break that down just simply on video, right? Like you can draw joint angles right over the video with some of the software that we have. So yeah, that kind of is it.
Neat stuff there. And I think this probably goes into injury prevention as well, but I'm curious about all of this early specialization. Obviously, that makes them acquire a lot of skills, but obviously leads to a lot of issues, hips, core, your tilt there. I'm curious about how you go about solving those issues. Is it just simply strength? Is it more awareness, like, hey, you need to set up a little bit straighter? Like, what does
Yeah.
that look like to you? And then obviously that probably leads into less injuries, more time on ice, the ability not to miss serious chunks of time in key development years.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Excuse me. Yeah, I think there's a few things going on there. Like, how do we address it? Well, we can address it, simply in the way we program, right? So uh, we simply, this is a question that might go over some of your listeners' heads, but uh, I've been mulling around of what role does a stretch shortening cycle play in hockey? And so our muscles are kind of like rubber bands where they stretch and compress really quickly and really well. And you can store energy by doing that. And I'll tie this in. But our stretch shortening cycle is heavily used in our drop jump test, where we're kind of expanding the length of the muscle and then snap it back as we, catapult up. So a lot of what I did as cross training is just in warm ups, having our athletes skip rope. And it's amazing to see. Uh, he won't mind if I throw him under the bus a little bit. But guys like Owen Power, even, right? This unbelievable athlete on the ice, but you go ask him to skip rope for the first time, and he doesn't look very coordinated and is struggling with it. And I'm not saying he was overly specialized early on, but it's getting athletes out of that element that they're used to, particularly in hockey, every day, and give them a different stimulus that's going to kind of cross train them, for other athletic components or athletic movements. So skipping rope was really effective for us. And so that's kind of what led me to that question of, what role does the stretch shortening cycle play in hockey? Because we saw good results, but for the most part, I don't see it super active. And then the second part to your question is, once the season was over, I'm actually programming in, like, for their summer program, I want you to go play 30 minutes of soccer, basketball, like anything else on certain days. So for like 3-4 weeks after a season, I'm programming in golf, I'm programming soccer, basketball, like other sports that I want them, just as if they're going to a weight room. Like, this isn't an optional thing. You're going to go play something else, be active, and it's going to benefit you. And then I think the education piece is huge. Like, if I went and said it just the way I did, I would get a lot of guys being like, okay, yeah, like, I got you, Bobby, but rolling their eyes and then, not putting any investment into it. So really the biggest thing that we found with the steel was educating them on the why, and why this will help them, why it's beneficial for their career, their health, because ultimately, if there's no value to the athlete there, like, they're just not going to do it. These kids are incredibly motivated, but you got to find out how to, get that motivation to where you need it, or applied to where you need it. So hopefully, yeah, I didn't throw too many listeners or shove them off with that stretch shortening cycle.
No, that was fantastic. I appreciate all the level of detail you're going into. This is fascinating. I'm definitely learning a ton, and there's no way others are not. So, are there any areas that you think we should attack a little bit further, or go deeper in? I've got one last question for us after that.
I mean, I think, again, to me, it's how much detail do you want to go in, but the goalie position to me is pretty fascinating, just because the demands of that position are so vastly different than the player. But I mean, as far as I've seen, a lot of the training both on and off the ice is for players. Like you even think about warm-ups, like some of the guys are coming down to the hash marks taking clap bombs on these goalies. We're like, how often are you really seeing that in the game? Or they're 2-on-1ing them, just 3 backdoor passes and warm-ups, and it's like, well, like this kid's not going to see that except maybe once a month. Or you even look at practices, right? Like they're going to see, they got a guy coming down the wall, they're going to see a shot, then they're another guy on the other wall, they see a shot. Their shot volume in practice is like tenfold, if not more, what they would see in a game. So there's questions I've had about, is that the right thing to do? Should we, pull back on some of the shots that they're seeing, and is there a quality versus quantity question going on? And then you can extrapolate this even further, take it to the weight room. Like, why are we having them train maybe in the same way that a skater is when on the ice they're not being asked to do the same thing? So that was a very different approach we took. All of our guys had individualized programs where it's developed just for that person. But the goalies even more so. Like they would have totally different workouts than what the players were doing. So anyway, that's always been of interest to me. I feel like on some teams, especially, they kind of get overlooked. Yet they still are one of the most important, if not the most important aspect.
I've heard many coaches say you're only as good as your goalie. So I got to believe that they're important, at least to a few coaches. So that's fantastic. The last question I have is a little more abstract, and it's around just like creating your process. So like everyone wants to do more, but how do you ensure that your process is efficient? It's reasonable for the athletes. How did you go about creating these processes, or how do you look at a process? Say you're dropped into the Chicago Steel, dropped into the University of Michigan, and you're trying to improve what's already there, build on top of it, or maybe with the Steel you build from scratch, whatever that may be. How do you approach a process? Because there's only so many hours in a day. We obviously want to do the work efficiently as possible, but also make it fun, entertaining, and really provide the best for our athletes.
Yeah, I guess quick clarification. What do you mean exactly in process? Like, is it the process of developing programs for the athletes or implementing, breaking down the season? Is there a specific element there you're curious on?
More so just your thought process. So like you're going in to do your work. How do you approach that? Or like, how are you looking at a process that you're taking over and saying, like this, don't like that? How do you want to improve the athletic process to get the best results?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, really
So
throwing you on the spot on that one. So
I,
apologies, but it was just burning on my mind. I'm like, okay, we keep talking about process, load management. How do we bring this all together through the athletic process?
oh, I love that. Yeah, you're pushing me here. I'd say, thinking back, I think one, you got to kind of step in with some aspect of humility and understand while there's things you want to change. That's not always the case. Uh, and I think tangentially to that is with that humility, you get the opportunity to invite others into, the process, quote unquote, who might have expertise or perspectives you haven't considered. But for me, it's very much about understanding what is the goal, what are the demands of the goal, and then how do we create those demands. So whether it's the performance on the ice, understanding physically, what's their heart rate doing, what strides do they have to do, what are the biomechanics, okay, can they meet that through our functional screens? If not, how do we address it? If it's on ice, of the video side and more what I'm doing here, knowing that, teams that win the special teams battles, if you win the net front, you win the quote puck possession metrics, that you're going to win the game. So if those are our KPIs for, the on ice execution, are we doing that in practice? What drills are we doing that are addressing that? Are they addressing it in a game-like fashion? Be it, is there pressure? Is it simply 5-on-5? Is it full speed? All those questions kind of go into it. And then I think what is really the most curious question is, what's the optimal way to structure your training or structure what you're doing uh, to facilitate that process or execute that process? Because there, I think you have multiple ways to skin the cat. I'm not saying what we did in Chicago is the perfect or best way, but it was certainly the best way that year when we win, right? So I don't think I have no illusions that somebody else could have done it a different way and had the same results. Um, but for me, that tying other people into that aspect of the process is helpful. Just because, I've only seen what I've seen and I don't know what I don't know. So when others can provide further information into that, I think you just have a better decision making capability when you have more eyes, more information. So I know that was kind of abstract in the answer, but for me, it's a lot about working backwards. Whether it's again the season or even the athlete, like if they have an issue, work backwards from that issue to find maybe the source. If we could use an example of maybe the anterior tilt example earlier, right? So your hips are pitched forward a little bit, but that oftentimes can come from maybe you just have super excessively tight quads. So your quads are so tight that they're pulling on the front of your pelvis, which is actually putting it into that anterior tilt. So we don't fix it by just attacking directly at the hips. We need to, understand through the process or that chain where to then make our correction. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question to some degree at least.
No, it's perfect. I love it. I think that last piece even is like you're basically working backwards from the issue, and you're not exactly looking at the issue, but the cause of the issue. Because I feel like so many people are just I call it first level thinking. Okay, there's an issue. We got to solve the issue. Second level thing is okay, we have an issue, but why do we have an issue? And thinking just a little, that's that second layer of the why, or the questioning it one more time to get down to defining the problem better before we go
Yeah,
and actually go around and put all this effort into solving something.
no, I think you're bang on too with that like third level thinking. And I think you can parlay that out even to, like, for instance, we had a kid who was came in as an affiliate with the Steel. Actually, no, he wasn't an affiliate. We traded for him mid-season, but seemed very disengaged. And even like our coach and GM, who would occasionally come through the weight room and just watch and see how things are going, took note of it. And so it's why is this kid disengaged, right? Like we found the issue. He doesn't seem engaged in the weight room or what he's doing. Questions why, but then we got to figure out how to get to the bottom of it. And so that's one where just cycling them into the process of those questionnaires was helpful, because we came to find out it's not like he didn't value it. In fact, he loved the weight room, but he was super intimidated by the fact that all these other guys were coming in, knew what to do, came into the weight room, started throwing up tons of weight that he was intimidated by, and didn't want to just be an interference or in the way up there. And so that's why he appeared disengaged. But to your point, you got to get to that third level of thinking to find out why this reason is, instead of just like slapping a label on this kid like, oh, he's a problem athlete or a problem child, he's not engaged, and then moving on. You actually bring him into the circle now, bring him into the mix. He feels better. He's going to work harder, yada, yada.
Yeah, I've got a story on that as well. Like a player that was going extra hard at practice, and he was like getting into pushing matches with other kids, and it was not so much, what are you doing? Stop doing that. Like for me, it was like, hey, what's going on? Like clearly something's different. Would like to know so we can better deal with anything and help you get on your merry way. So, and that was the more powerful thing, was just asking, hey, what's going on, rather than, slapping the label on or reprimanding. Bobby, this was a fantastic episode. Wonderful listen. I really appreciate your diligence and level of detail and all the answers. I learned a ton. I hope everyone else did as well. Is there anything else you think we should talk about, or we should end it here and come back another day?
No, yeah, maybe we save the rest for another day. But thank you for having me on. Pretty awesome experience, and yeah, hopefully you guys or your listeners enjoyed it.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.